And welcome to a special edition of Stakelbeck on Terror from Israel, Jerusalem, the eternal city. I've been here for the past week working with our CBN News Middle East team and talking with Israeli officials about what lies ahead for the Middle East. Just a few hundred miles from where I'm standing in Cairo, Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak recently stepped down as a result of the Egyptian Revolution of 2011. So we're going to spend the next 30 minutes here in Jerusalem with our CBN News Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell analyzing the threats gathering against Israel. What lies next for the Holy Land? Let's go to work and find out. And I'm joined now by CBN News Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell. Chris, welcome to Stakelbeck on Terror.
Great to be with you, Eric.
Shalom, what a view.
This is amazing.
This is amazing.
We're looking at the Jaffa Gate behind us,
Yes.
Mount Zion right across the valley, and this is the Ben Hinnom Valley that rolls all the way down to the old city of David. It is an amazing place to be.
Yeah, and as you and I were discussing last night, Chris, a lot of history has happened here in Jerusalem, and there's a lot of history still to be made in this city. And a lot of history just went down a few hundred miles from here, Chris, in Egypt, and you were a witness to history.
Yeah.
You just returned from Cairo, where you had a pretty harrowing experience, I'd say. Let's start from the top. How did you get into Cairo? Tell us about your first days in Egypt and kind of what transpired there.
It was the day after the main riots that took place on Friday. It was a Monday night, and I went down on an El Al flight. Believe it or not, El Al was still flying into Cairo at that time. The only people that were on the flight were an Israeli security detail and mainly journalists. And we got to the airport fully expecting to stay the night at the airport because by then there was a curfew on. Started at 4 in the afternoon, landed at about 8 in the morning. So none of the journalists really thought we would get out of the airport until we found a taxi driver who would literally take us to our hotels. And we were quite excited to hear about that. Yeah. What happened next was something we had never experienced before. From the airport to the hotel, there were literally about 80 random checkpoints by vigilantes, just self-appointed neighbors that were protecting their properties, because what had happened is that the police had sort of vanished. Right. And
there have been some prison breaks too as well, right?
Exactly. Thousands of prisoners had been let out of the prisons. So there was very little law and order, and so literally the people had to take law into their own hands at that time.
Now, your first day on the ground, I believe it was a Tuesday in Egypt. That's right. You said it was a pretty good vibe there. It was almost a festive kind of atmosphere.
Like a carnival. I mean, people were there, families were there with their kids. They were taking pictures of their children on tanks or armored personnel carriers. Tens of thousands of people in Tahrir Square. And there was just a sense of peace, a sense of celebration. There was a sense of euphoria that there was so much momentum going for the crowds that eventually they would get what they wanted, which was forcing Hosni Mubarak to leave.
So where did it all take a turn for the sinister?
Wednesday, the next day. I got there Monday night. Tuesday was a celebration. Wednesday was a turning point. What happened after we'd done our report early in the morning, thousands of pro-Mubarak supporters came down to the square and confronted the tens of thousands of anti-Mubarak people. And when I saw that happening, I was a few blocks away. I saw that happening. I thought, well, let me see what's going to happen. Right. So I went down there and was just a few hundred feet away when everything changed.
Wow, and everything got violent.
Very violent. I was in the crowd, and you could see literally the street was packed with people. And I really just had a sense in my heart that something's going to change, something's going to happen. And almost like a trigger, what happened was the people that were pro-Mubarak and the people that anti-Mubarak, they just started running. The pro-Mubarak, I was in the pro-Mubarak crowd at the time, they started running like a wave. And literally, I had to run with them or I would have been trampled.
You were caught up in this.
I was caught up in that. I had a small camera. I was taking pictures myself. And if I didn't run with the crowd, though, I just had this thought in my mind, I'm going to be trampled. So thankfully, I was near the side of the road, was able to go into a construction site like many people on the sidewalk did. And as we went in there, there was some protection, because what had happened is that people were starting to throw shoes at one another. And then they were throwing rocks, and I was thinking,
and large rocks.
Big rocks, you know, dangerous.
So you're ducking and you're running?
I'm ducking and running and got into the construction site. And when I got in there was a bit of refuge because the rocks were going up and down the street. And but I kept videotaping, and then the most bizarre thing that happened, horses started running down the street, and then
And
a
a camel.
a camel came down.
Yeah. And you saw all of this.
Yeah, I saw that. It was just a few hundred.
What a surreal scene.
Yeah, maybe 20 or 30 feet away from the camel that goes by. It was surreal.
Then things took a turn for the worse for you personally.
Right.
It got very hairy there for a second. Chris, tell us about that.
It did. I was there videotaping. By that time, I had called CBN because I had filed a report. Well, I knew as soon as the riot started that report was already outdated. So I was continuing to get them on the phone. Finally, I did get CBN on the phone, and I'm telling about this riot that's literally going on right in front of my eyes. And somebody came up to me, and he said to me in Arabic, which I didn't understand the words, but I understood his meaning, which was stop videotaping. So I took this small JVC camera, put it in my pocket, but continued to talk to CBN. Well, he stayed beside me, and I actually told one of my CBN colleagues, pray for me, I think there's a secret police right beside me. So he was uncomfortably standing right beside me, so I decided to leave and get away from him. I walked about 75 feet, turned around, and as soon as I did, one guy grabbed the BlackBerry out of my hand, and then another second accomplice took the camera out of my jacket, and then they vanished.
And that night, things got really interesting. You observed literally hand-to-hand combat in the streets below your hotel. Tell us about that a bit.
Well, what had happened is that what had begun with shoes and then went to rocks become eventually Molotov cocktails and eventually actually gunfire. So I walked from where I was, this bureau that I was using as a base, to my hotel, which was literally on the front lines of this battle. It was like a front row seat to what was happening in Egypt's history, this battle between pro-Mubarak and anti-Mubarak demonstrators. We could see throughout the night petrol bombs being thrown from building to building, from building to the street below. There was rocks being thrown, and there was this constant beat. It was almost like this medieval siege, like a scene out of Braveheart or something.
Yes.
And later in the night, there was gunfire that came from what I thought was heavy machine gun fire. There was small arms fire. There were tracer bullets that were going in front of the hotel over the Nile River, which ran right alongside near the hotel. And
all night long?
All night long, even till the very morning. And the military was there, but did nothing to intervene. It was like lawlessness, just anarchy, just unbelievable scene of these two forces, these two mobs actually fighting with one another. And you really didn't know exactly how far it would spread. We were very close to it, and it was getting closer to the hotel. And we thought, at least I thought at the time, that maybe it would even spread to the hotel itself.
When did you make the decision to get out, and how did you get out?
Well, it was about 5 in the morning, and the U.S. State Department issued a ruling, and it said all Americans should immediately, after the curfew is over, go to the airport. I saw that on CNN. In fact, I was watching CNN and BBC at the time. I could watch their live shots of the battle and literally walk out to the balcony. Eventually, I was crawling out to the balcony because of the gunfire and watched the very same scene. So when I saw that on CNN that this is what the U.S. State Department issued, I started thinking to myself, well, maybe it's time to go.
Well, Chris, you were there at great personal risk. Journalists were being attacked. A Fox News crew was almost killed there.
Yeah.
So you were there at great personal risk. Just an unbelievable experience. What do you take from this?
Well, I found out a lot of those incidents after I got out. In fact, I remember hearing about Greg Palcott and his cameramen, and they escaped from one of those buildings that I was probably watching. They found themselves caught in one of those buildings in the crossfire, nearly got killed. There was an ABC News crew that was threatened with beheading. Anderson Cooper got hurt. My cameraman in the morning said he was called a traitor by some people, and cameras were being destroyed. So I think there were at least 60 incidents, if not more.
And a Swedish journalist we found out yesterday was almost killed.
Exactly, yeah. So he's still in the hospital, and they're hoping that he can get back to normal. But it was, at that moment, was probably the hardest time for foreign journalists as they were doing their reporting.
Yeah. So what comes next?
What comes next? That's the big question.
That's a big question coming up.
Yeah. You know, one thing that was unifying everybody, let's get rid of Hosni Mubarak. There was a sense that the power of the street was going to overwhelm the power of the palace. But everyone's got many different agendas. What's going to come next? That's the big question I think everybody's asking right now.
Chris, that is the big question, and we're going to address that later on in the show. Much more to come here from Jerusalem with our Middle East Bureau Chief, Chris Mitchell. Brother, thank God you're safe. We appreciate you. Much more to come here on Stakelbeck on Terror from the Eternal City, Jerusalem. Stay tuned.
Ready on the set? Dr. Robertson in 3, 2.
On December 3rd, 2009, Pat Robertson entered the studio to update his landmark work, The Secret Kingdom, to help people live abundant lives amid today's challenges.
I want to talk to you today about The Secret Kingdom. What is The Secret Kingdom?
Taken from his national bestseller, this latest DVD by Pat Robertson reveals how God's kingdom works. Principles that produce exceptional growth and development. Unchanging keys that build success in business, finances, health, relationships, and much more.
You can reach from a world of impossibilities into a realm of limitless possibility and power.
For the first time on DVD, The Secret Kingdom Volume 1, available now.
The 700 Club. See it as never before. The stories, the places, the people. The 700 Club, now in HD. We'll take you to India, China, Africa, Thailand, and across the USA. So close, you'll feel as though you were there. Look into the eyes of the people you've helped and see the hope you've given them. Experience what God is doing in the world today in high definition. The 700 Club, now in HD.
And welcome back to Stakelbeck on Terror from Jerusalem. To live in Israel means that you're living every day with the threat of terrorism, Islamic terrorism, hanging over your head. And Chris and I are here right now at a memorial for Israeli victims of Palestinian terrorism. Chris, you lived close by to this site where a horrific terrorist attack took place in 2004. Tell us a bit about what happened here and why this is hallowed ground to the Israeli people.
Well, it happened February 22nd, 2004. I was living just a few blocks away, heard a sound, actually thought it was a windy day, thought it maybe something crashed over. Within a few minutes, I got a call and found out it was one more terror attack. During those early years of the Intifada that began in 2000, that ended maybe 2004 or 5, there were literally over 600 terror attacks within the city of Jerusalem. This was maybe one of the biggest in the last. Thankfully, they haven't had as many terror attacks, mainly because of what they've built, this barrier to protect themselves.
Right. Now, we see here, Chris, an 18-year-old, two 18-year-olds, a 20-year-old, a 31-year-old. These are young people, families, wives, children, and this was a theme. Throughout the Palestinian Intifada, we saw young people killed, old people. Palestinian terrorists don't discriminate when it comes to murdering Jewish civilians, do they?
No. I mean, when you go on a bus, you don't know who's going to be on a bus. I mean, it ranges from young kids to old senior citizens. So this it's indiscriminate. I mean, when it hits people and it affects not only the person, obviously, who died or is wounded, but it affects their family, their friends. When I was living here back in those days, you always knew somebody who might have known somebody who was affected by it. It ripples throughout the society.
I don't think the American people, Chris, I don't think an American audience, with all due respect, everyone back home, I don't think people can wrap their heads around what Israelis live with every day. You never know what's around the next corner when you go to the shopping mall, when you get on a bus, when you send your kids to school. Here in Israel, you never know if they'll come home. Quite frankly, is America ready for such an atmosphere? It's a whole different world here in Israel. And Chris, one of the groups that was behind a lot of this terrorism was the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade. They were actually behind this heinous terrorist attack. Now, the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade is a wing of the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority, which is supposedly moderate and supposedly Israel's partner for peace. But you and I were talking before we began here, and you told me different sections and segments of the Palestinian Authority were actually responsible for a great deal of the terrorism against Israel.
Yeah, a lot of people talk about Hamas, but actually Fatah and the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade were responsible for even more terror attacks than Hamas. You know, Eric, this particular bombing was done by the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, but many of the terror attacks at that time were done by Hamas. And it would be reflected by the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, but it's instructive to know why Hamas does what it does. And if you look at their charter in Article 7, it quotes the Hadith, the Islamic sayings of Muhammad, and says "O Muslim, there is a Jew behind this stone or this tree. Rise up and kill him." And this is what motivates many of these radical Islamists, that they want to eradicate the Jewish people, they want to destroy the Jewish state. And so this is motivating not just them against Israel, but also against the great Satan, which is the United States, Israel being the little Satan, and eventually world domination.
Chris, you put it beautifully, and thank you for laying that out for us. And remember that Israel's enemies are America's enemies. The same Islamic fanatics that want to kill you and your children have been doing it here for years to the Israeli people. You need a reason to stand with Israel? There you go. And there's much more to come here from Jerusalem at Stakelbeck on Terror with Chris Mitchell, our Middle East Bureau Chief. Don't move.
From the world's leading Christian news operation, a groundbreaking step that brings you national, international news and analysis at your fingertips. The CBN News Channel. For the first time ever, you get the benefits of a full-time news channel from the renowned CBN News team, 24/7 on the web. CBN News Channel provides a new platform by delivering CBN News to a larger audience through the latest technology.
News viewers have made it clear they're dissatisfied with their choices. They want news without a spin.
CBN News Channel answers that need
with a trustworthy alternative that's easy to find, easy to watch, any time of the day.
CBNNewsChannel.com. 24/7 on the web.
I had this great idea, but I felt like I was the only one who could see its potential. I imagined not just what I could do, but what I could be in business. That's why I went to Regent for my college degree. They brought out God's best in me, so I could bring my best to the world.
At Regent, you can study online or on campus. For more information, visit regentundergrad.com or call 1-800-210-0060.
When you choose Regent, you're choosing to change your life.
And welcome back to this special edition of Stakelbeck on Terror from Jerusalem. I'm standing here at the Haas Promenade. What a view, with our Middle East Bureau Chief, Chris Mitchell. And as we said at the top of the show, Chris just returned from Cairo. Upheaval there. Mubarak's gone. Chris, what comes next? I know the big fear here in Israel, talking to Israeli officials, is that the Muslim Brotherhood will be empowered in Egypt and may eventually take the reins there. What do you see unfolding in Egypt?
Well, right now, what they, as we said earlier in the segment, that everybody was unified. Mubarak, let's get him out, and he's out now. But as you said, the Muslim Brotherhood is the big wild card. What's going to happen here in Israel? They're at least comforted by just a few days after the ouster of Mubarak that the military, Egyptian military, said they will honor all international agreements. And one of the biggest things for Israel is the plus 30-year treaty with Egypt and Israel, that would be preserved.
I look at the protesters, Chris, and they seem kind of disorganized. They all knew they wanted Mubarak out, but they didn't really know what they wanted next. They want freedom, they want democracy. Then I look at the Muslim Brotherhood. They're completely organized. They're the largest opposition force in Egypt. They know exactly what they want, Sharia, the caliphate. What's your sense of the Brotherhood from talking to Israeli officials? How concerned are the Israelis about the potential of an Islamic State in Egypt run by the Brotherhood?
I think that's their worst case scenario. If somehow that the military could preserve the status quo for at least the indefinite future, that would be a good thing. But if everybody in the world is insisting on free and fair elections, I mean, I think their worst case scenario that free and fair elections would include the Muslim Brotherhood. You can look back to 2006 here when the U.S. State Department was saying, let's have elections. Well, what happened was Hamas won. And so they won the majority of the seats in the parliament. And that's the concern here in Israel, that the Muslim Brotherhood, even if the next several years, will just gain more and more influence in Egypt itself.
You know, Chris, I talked to an Israeli counterterrorism expert this week who said this might not be an Iran situation where Egypt becomes an Islamic State overnight. He saw it playing out more like we saw in Lebanon with Hezbollah, where in 2005, Lebanon took part in elections, won some seats in parliament. Now, just a month ago, they basically took control of the Lebanese government. It took them 6 years, but they finally got there. And if Hezbollah controls Lebanon, that means, as we know, Iran controls Lebanon because Hezbollah is an arm, literally, of the Iranian regime. Chris, do you think Iran is excited? Speaking of our friends in Tehran, are they excited about what's going on in Egypt right now? Do they see an opportunity there?
I think they see a golden opportunity. I think they're thrilled. And there's also, you know, this schism between Shiite and Sunni. But I think that Iran's willing to overcome that because they're supporting Hamas in the Gaza Strip. So they can overlook the differences between the Shiites and the Sunnis. So I think this is a prime opportunity for Iran, what they're expecting this, and expecting that their influence will increase in the Middle East. Another thing Mubarak did was he was sort of like a barrier or a bulwark against Iranian influence through the Middle East. Now that he's gone, who knows what's going to happen?
Yeah, you know, with the Sunni-Shia divide, when it comes to killing Christians and Jews, they seem to get along just fine. You look at Israel right now, Chris, and you live here, you're in Jerusalem. It's almost like a pincer movement around Israel. Hezbollah to the north, Syria, Iran to the east, Hamas to the south. Even Turkey is now an adversary, I would say. And if Egypt goes to the Brotherhood, all bets are off the table. What's the sense here among Israeli officials? Do they see war in the near future?
Somebody said recently that if you say there's going to be war in the future, in near future in Israel, you're probably right. I think they do. And right now, it's a critical time for the Israeli military. They're just going to get a new chief of staff in the next few days. Right. So he's going to have a lot of contingency plans, I'm sure, that he's developing. How are they going to confront, you know, perhaps a multiple war on multiple fronts, from Hezbollah, from Iran, from Syria? And I wouldn't be surprised with the weakness of Egypt right now and then the vulnerability of Israel that something could happen in the near future, and perhaps Iran, Syria, Hezbollah, Hamas may think this is the time to strike Israel.
You know, Chris, it's all very biblical.
Yes.
Israel is surrounded by her enemies. Last question, Chris, then we'll cut to the commercial. Iran's nuclear program. We've heard that, you know, sanctions have been having an effect. We've heard that this Stuxnet computer virus has had some effect. But I talked to an Israeli official this week. I asked him about Stuxnet, which is a computer virus that apparently infected Iran's nuclear facilities. And I said, what about Stuxnet? He said, so what? He said, at the end of the day, Stuxnet may have had an effect for a year or two, but it's not going to stop the Iranians. They're going to keep working on that nuclear program. What's your sense right now among the Israelis vis-a-vis this Iranian nuclear program? It's tough to play the prophet here, even though we're in Jerusalem. Where's this heading, do you think?
Well, that's a great question, and that's the question that's been facing Israel for the last several years. What are they going to do with Iran's nuclear program? Will they attack it? Will they just try to delay it? But like you said, even if they delay it, there'll be a time when they'll have to confront. What will they do? Will they actually try to militarily stop their program? I talked to the former Israeli ambassador, one of the last ambassadors in Tehran just before the Islamic Revolution. He himself has an interesting take on it. He thinks that a military strike might be counterproductive. He's looking for an overthrow of the regime. And we saw that in 2009 when literally 1 million Iranians took to the streets, almost like they did here in February in 2011. Unfortunately, they didn't get the support they were looking for from President Obama. But who knows, maybe there will be some sort of overthrow of the regime. That would send a shout of freedom throughout the Middle East.
Coming up on this special edition of Stakelbeck on Terror from Jerusalem, what lies next for the Eternal City? We're going to talk about it coming up. Much more with our Middle East Bureau Chief, Chris Mitchell, on the future of Jerusalem. Stay tuned right here on Stakelbeck on Terror.
Daddy?
Yeah, buddy?
How many nickels are in a dollar?
There are 20 nickels in a dollar.
How do birds fly? Does milk really make my bones stronger?
Yeah.
Daddy, when we die, will we go to heaven?
Do you have the answer to life's biggest question? Call the 700 Club. We'll help you find answers to the important questions life brings your way.
And welcome back to Stakelbeck on Terror from Jerusalem. Chris, I look out over the city, and it's mentioned, I think, literally hundreds of times in the Bible. And the Bible actually says Jerusalem will be a burdensome stone for all the nations eventually. There's a lot of talk about dividing this city right now. What are you hearing here in Israel about the possible division of Jerusalem? Is that a possibility?
It's a very distinct possibility. They're talking about, there's many nations right now that are recognizing independently a Palestinian state. Well, a Palestinian state wants to divide the city of Jerusalem between east and west. We saw what happens when just a few weeks ago there was something called the Shepherd's Hotel, which was owned by a Jewish businessman. He wanted to destroy the hotel, set up apartments for Jews. It became a worldwide incident. And it says, there's a saying that says, you know, if Jerusalem sneezes, the rest of the world gets a cold. So there's a sense that everything that happens in Jerusalem, from the division of the city to things that are happening in the city, they literally attract worldwide attention.
It seems like the Netanyahu government is drawing a red line there. That's a line they won't cross. They won't divide Jerusalem. It seems like Bibi Netanyahu is stuck to his guns there, though, right?
I think so. And maybe this is what Zechariah was talking about one day when he says this city has become a burdensome stone. You know, if Israel says this is our red line, that we won't divide the city of Jerusalem, it's clear that much of the world is saying you need to divide the Jerusalem. And maybe there'll come a time when the world itself will pressure Israel so much that the city, like Zechariah said, will become a burdensome stone.
Yeah, and you know, the Obama administration back in the States has been pressuring Israel to divide Jerusalem and, as you said, make it a part of a Palestinian state. The Israeli government's really going to have to stand strong. You've been here now for 11 years?
In my 11th year, yeah.
Yeah, so what does this city mean to you? I mean, I look out. This is a city of incredible views no matter where you go. We're up in the mountains. What does this city mean to you, Chris, personally? You've really grown to love this city. You're a Jerusalemite.
Yeah, in many ways, I guess I've become a Jerusalemite. At least I drive like one, people say. But what being here is like watching, you know, the Bible unfold, and history itself is going to end right here. We're looking back to the Mount of Olives, and this is where Jesus said that one day his feet will land back on the Mount of Olives, where he'll come to rule and reign for 1,000 years. So this is sort of, as our friend Joel Rosenberg has said, this is the epicenter. And we've been seeing trends. I've been able to witness trends that have come here, and they focus on the city of Jerusalem. We see even from this Haas Promenade just a few months ago, where they had a global day of prayer for the peace of Jerusalem. So there's a phenomenon happening around the world where Christians, literally from the South Seas to South America to North America, millions of people are focused their prayers on the peace of the city of Jerusalem. And you see biblical prophecy unfold like the gospel. There's a trend in China that the gospel will come back here. They want to complete the Great Commission, and what they're calling their trend is back to Jerusalem. So we see the culmination prophetically, politically, spiritually will come to this city one day.
Well, Chris, I've had a blast, and I thank you so much for having me here at the Jerusalem Bureau. I hope we can do it again.
Come back.
It was a blast, brother. Thank you so much.
All right.
And that's it for this special edition of Stakelbeck on Terror from Israel. Hopefully we can come back here next year, do an annual edition of the show, if Chris will have us. In the meantime, pray for the peace of Jerusalem and keep it right here as we report on the advancing global jihad that's in your backyard. Until next time, take care and God bless.